I'm Steven Serda. Day 4, full team practice is in the book for the Kansas City Chiefs. It's the last day without pads, and the Chiefs will be off on Thursday. So Friday is when training camp really starts for the defending Super Bowl champions. So let me welcome in the leader of Arrowhead Pride, the man with the best hair flow on the Chiefs beat, Pete Sweeney. Sween, what's going on?
I really might regret going with long hair for camp. I'm trying to get through camp because it is hot and it is curling up on me, and I think if I can just get through for coverage inside, I'll be all right. But yes, you'll see a hat on me later when we record the Arrowhead Pride Editor show.
Yeah, it's probably not nicer in Kansas City. I don't know if it rained in St. Joe today, but it stormed here for like a half an hour. Got dark. Power flickered on and off. I was panicking again because I didn't have power for a couple of days a couple of weeks ago, but it's sunny again and supposed to be over 100 degrees later in the afternoon. So
if you're listening on the Arrowhead Pride podcast channel, I know, Steve, you take a break and then you play the interviews from the podium. You'll hear Matt Nagy and George Karlaftis joking about the heat. It was like the Sahara Desert. There was no water in sight up here in St. Joseph today, and extremely hot. So it's good to have practice over with and good to be leading into what will be a much needed day off. And then, as you mentioned, we get the pads on Friday.
So yeah, a lot to get into after today's practice. And as I mentioned, I think camp really starts on Friday once they can get into some of this contact and get the pads on and start hitting and everything. But some notes to catch you up on. And Pete, you tweeted out this morning that Nick Bolton wasn't on the practice field. The Chiefs did confirm he was out sick today. Still no Chris Jones. Linebacker Isaiah Moore was also out. John Ross was also out. And no Kadarius Toney, and Turk Wharton still remains on the PUP. But good thing that, headed into Friday's padded practice, this isn't an injury or anything that Nick Bolton's dealing with. He was just sidelined with an illness on Wednesday. Yeah,
and what these days where guys are out and again, never want to see anyone out of practice, but when it's a day when they're going to miss a day or two, like a sickness is when they're going to miss a day or two, or a bump and a bruise where the Chiefs just back off as a day or two. What it affords you, and this is just looking at the solace and the bright side of it, is getting to see what the team looks like without key player X. And what you saw today, and kudos to him, was Drew Tranquil taking over those green dot duties, which is usually up to Nick Bolton to get the defense in place. And I just think it's impressive the fact that, we're only a couple days still into training camp with the full team, and he has the ability to get these guys in position and work with Steve Spagnuolo to a point where they feel comfortable giving him the green dot in a pinch. Ron Kopp, our lead analyst there at Pride, he noted this on Twitter, and I thought it was a good point. Tranquil ends up being the dime linebacker for this team, and he's someone that works his way into potentially even the base defense, certainly the nickel. Are we looking at a player coming in and somehow unseating like Nick Bolton and Willie Gay for the snap count lead? I think it's not something that we can say right now. I think the linebacker room is what it is, but it certainly feels like something that could be on the table by the time you get out of training camp. Needless to say, whoever is taking these snaps, and that's something they're figuring out this month with preseason games and training camp, Chiefs are in really good hands in the linebacker room. I think it's one of those underrated rooms of the team, perhaps the deepest when you really look at all the linebackers that can play and play good snaps for the Chiefs. Leo Chanel, another one.
Yeah, as soon as the Chiefs signed Drew Tranquil as a free agent this offseason, I know the AP team, especially our film room guys, were just salivating at the role that he could have in this defense. So to see him have the green dot this early in camp and stepping in for Nick Bolton in that way shows how much trust they have in him. And I know defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo has been highly complimentary of him so far, and just how he operates and the way he's attacking everything on the field when they don't even have the pads on yet.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting room to watch, and it was interesting in the base defense to see Tranquil calling the plays, flanked by what would be Leo Chanel and Willie Gay, and players get hurt, right? So I think that was a room where you lose one of those top three guys. Maybe you're a little bit worried, and now you're running four deep, and Steve Spagnuolo likes to rotate these guys on both the first and second level. So you're going to see a lot of different looks, a lot of different players mixing in. And I think Drew Tranquil is seeming like a really nice ad for Brett Veach this offseason.
Another thing that I think, and we've talked about it the last couple of days, but I feel like it's maybe the most surprising thing so far of training camp, even though we're still so early. And that's second year cornerback Najee Johnson, who continues to get opportunities. And we know the Chiefs are easing in L'Jarius Sneed and Trent McDuffie, and they've got a really deep cornerback room right now with a lot of talented young players who are projecting to have big roles on that defense. But for a guy who was a big time special teams contributor as a rookie to be getting this many reps early on in training camp and to be doing it a lot with the first team defense, I think it says a lot about how the Chiefs view him headed into this season.
Yeah, and I just think it was a room last year where we saw Steve Spagnuolo rotate Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams, and now I think there's another player that is going to make things interesting in Najee Johnson. Najee Johnson, the seventh rounder from last year. And I mean, you look at the rest of the league, this was a guy that for a little bit was available on the practice squad for anyone to potentially sign. And I want to bring up a name that we haven't talked about in a while, Steve, and it's Rashad Fenton. When injuries were with the Chiefs and Rashad was out and it came time for him to get back in the mix, what did you end up seeing? Rather than having to send Najee Johnson to the practice squad and risk him, they traded Rashad Fenton to the Atlanta Falcons. He was a valuable backup slot guy for the Chiefs who they had really liked and really relied on for a long time. So I just think if you think back to that move, that told you how important Najee Johnson was to this Chiefs team. And I thought this was interesting. It was both him and Joshua Williams getting the first gunner opportunities when it came time for special teams this practice. And I do wonder if Najee Johnson is able to break through as someone they really want to run potentially at that starting nickel boundary corner. You start to see maybe him losing those gunner duties because we've seen earlier this week, unfortunately, what sometimes special teams can do when it comes to injuries. So do they take him off of that? It's a developing story and something we'll be certainly watching as pads come on. But yes, maybe it's a rotation of three rather than it just being Watson and Williams. Maybe Johnson is in that mix this year for real snaps in the cornerback room.
Yeah, I think it's been one of the more interesting things to watch this early in camp. And again, we talked about it yesterday. We've still got a long way to go. There's still a lot of decisions to be made, a lot of guys to get reps and opportunities. So we'll figure all that out as we go. And sticking on the defensive side of the ball, we heard from George Karlaftis after practice today, and he kind of talked about the absence of Chris Jones. And it seems like every defensive player is talking about the absence of Chris Jones, but he is still not in attendance at training camp. We'll have to continue to talk about that every single day until Chris Jones decides to show up. But I'm still holding out hope, Pete, that we see him show up and hold in by Friday.
I think that's a possibility. I remember, before the situation where he chose not to report, my prediction was Wednesday or Thursday. And Steve, we're running out of time here. We're running out of daylight on Wednesday. I don't think I'm going to be right about that. But I think there is a chance for Friday. And I think you made a good point yesterday with Danielle Hunter and the Minnesota Vikings and holding in. I think that would be good for relations between the Chiefs and Jones and his representatives, is in good faith showing up to camp. I think fans would understand if he still doesn't want to practice, waiting for the deal to come through. You would never want to take the field as you're approaching a monster second defensive tackle in the league extension and risk injury. I think we understand that. But I think showing up would do a lot again for the good faith. So I think you hope to see that on Friday. I think it's a possibility. But again, until he shows up, players like George Karlaftis at the podium are going to get asked about this. And Karlaftis is going to, have to just say, look, we're working on it as a group now. He mentioned Derek Nottie by name. Derek Nottie has been stepping up. I had mentioned Daniel Wise has been a player that has been stepping in. Last year, it reminded me today of when Roderick Johnson was taking the snaps while everybody was waiting for Orlando Brown Jr. And then eventually, Orlando Brown Jr. showed up. And so I anticipate the same with Jones, except this time I do see a contract extension happening. But again, yes, we will be discussing this ad nauseum until Jones finally shows up in St. Joe.
So I think we'll learn a lot more about this defensive line too now that the pads are going to come on. It's really hard to, when there's no contact and they're kind of walking through and trying to take things light early on in camp as they ramp all these guys up. It's really hard to say, oh, George Karlaftis looks so much better this season than he does as a rookie early on in camp, or Chiefs rookie first round pick Felix Anudike-Uzomah like looks amazing so far. We haven't really got an opportunity to judge those players just yet, or Charles Omenihu. So I think we'll learn a lot on Friday. We'll learn a lot more going forward, and hopefully the Chiefs have Chris Jones at least in St. Joe sooner rather than later while they work on that long-term deal. But Pete, moving to the offensive side of the ball, and I feel like you especially were feeling very confident about which wide receivers were kind of locks for this team. And I know it's early, but Pete, Justin Ross continues to make plays. Rashee Rice seems to continue to be making plays and looking good as a rookie wide receiver. And now if Justin Ross finds a way to make this roster, I'm starting to question whether or not we have to start looking at one of these other veteran wide receivers who might be on the chopping block. And initially we didn't think that was going to be the case.
Yeah, there's a huge problem in Kansas City right now. We can get into more details on the editor's show, and that is you got to keep Kadarius Toney on the 53-man roster because he practiced for 3 minutes, which means he's ineligible for the PUP. We discussed a little bit yesterday, and you probably still want to keep 6 more receivers because I don't know if he's going to be ready for the beginning of the season. And I know the Chiefs are optimistic for week 1. They're saying a chance. Even if he is ready, I don't know if they rush him right back into action without getting some real practice reps. It's been tough to keep him on the field. And so I don't think you're going to want to risk waiving any of these receivers that you want back on your team. So in my original 53-man roster, I had 6 receivers, not including a Justin Ross and Amir Smith-Marset, one of those guys that were hopeful. Whereas now I think in my next 53, I'm going to have to backtrack and backwire it a little bit to include 7 receivers because I think that's what the Chiefs are going to end up having to do. So who is at risk? At that point, is it a situation? And I'm just going to name a hypothetical that would come to my mind right here, okay? Where the Chief and have Brett Beach walk up to Blake Bell and say, Blake, we are going to make sure that you're back with the team on what would be September 1st. You're going to be cut today. Sorry about this, but you're a veteran. You're not waived. You have all those years under your belt, so you're just released. We include, and I can't even believe I'm about to say this, we include Justin Ross on the initial 53-man roster. You send Kadarius Toney to the injured reserve, the temporary injured reserve, because remember, they have to make the initial team to do that. And then what you do now at that spot is you go, hey, Blake, remember when you cut yesterday? You're back. Congratulations. And this is a family man, probably doesn't want to leave Kansas City. We'll do a similar handshake type of thing with Brett Beach to get him back in the mix, probably give him a little bit of a boost in payment to do something like that. And that's how you end up having a Justin Ross in this roster. And they buy time for Kadarius Toney to be really actually healthy when you're going into week 5. And so the scenarios are abound, Steve, and you're having to see some opportunities for other guys. I had mentioned that I think Richie James and Justin Ross are getting even more time with Patrick Mahomes because of this situation. And the Chiefs have to figure it out. Fortunately, they still, as we talked today, have 43 days to do so. And so we will see what this team looks like by the time we get to that first game against the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, it just seems like when you look at all of the wide receivers on this team right now, it seems like they've got a talented player there. It seems like he's a talented player. We've seen this guy produce in this offense before. And so it's still the room with the most question marks. But it seems like we are getting as much as we possibly could want out of this wide receiver room, at least early on in camp. And still plenty of time to go, still a lot of decisions to be made. And I wanted to ask you about Isaiah Pacheco. It seems like second day in a row, he at least has been on the field for 7-on-7 drills and continues to get worked back in slowly. And it really is seeming like the Chiefs are expecting Isaiah Pacheco to be ready to go at week 1 of the NFL regular season.
Yeah, continues to go well. We're seeing a little bit more each and every day. I don't think the Chiefs are going to put him in pads on Friday, right? I still think he'll be in that yellow non-contact jersey. But yesterday, for example, we saw 3 7-on-7 snaps. Today, we saw him with the ball in his hands. With the yellow jersey, the Chiefs defenders go nowhere near him, which is what you want to see right now. But I think they're being overcautious. I think this is the Rick ramp-up, if you want to call it that, where he's working directly with Rick Burkholder, and they're inching him along. And again, I know I sound like a broken record when I keep mentioning the 40 days. but this is an abnormally long training camp. So there's absolutely no reason to be rushing Isaiah Pacheco along. So as he continues on his inching his way path, he continues to look better and better. And I can't see, unless there were to be a random setback, him missing any time during the regular season. And I wouldn't be stunned with how many practices there are between now and the first preseason game that you might see him for a couple carries in the first preseason game. I probably no more than 2 or 3, right? But I think that's a possibility as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming clear that they expect him to be healthy and ready to go, but they aren't going to take any chances with him as they hope to expand his role in year number 2 in the offense. And this is the final thing for me, Pete. And really, it's just because we do this every year in training camp where we're spending so much time talking about the question marks and the guys that are attempting to make the roster. But how do Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelsey look? I feel like we haven't talked about the 2 most important players on the team a single time since training camp started, basically.
Yeah, Mahomes is dishing the ball to Kelsey. I think you're right. It's funny. Whenever we're up here, especially I feel like at the beginning, it's like the Chiefs are trying to see what they have with other players and featuring them a little bit more. Like we've seen a lot of Sky Moore. We've seen a good amount of Rashee Rice. We've seen them trying passes to an example to a Justin Ross with Patrick Mahomes. Kelsey has catches here and there. As you would expect, he's living in the middle of the field and draws a lot of attention and still manages to catch the football. So that, they've been good. But I just think when we're at training camp, we're trying to figure out more about these new players and how new pieces fit. Whereas, as Nagy was alluding to in his press conference, Mahomes and Kelsey are the mainstays, right? And we know exactly what to expect from them. At some point here, maybe Travis Kelsey starts to have a few yet less yards. Has shown no sign of that in any of the past 7 years, and so they look good, right? I mean, they look as they do. We know that Travis Kelsey's still going to be the number 1 target on his team, but I think the team and Mahomes make a point of it to let's test these younger players. He talked yesterday about testing cornerbacks. I think he's testing it with some of the younger offensive weapons he has more. So I think they see more targets when we're here early in camp, and I think that's intentional.
Yeah, I just every now and then I got to ask about the future Hall of Famers because we just do not spend a lot of time focused on them. And I get it. It's training camp, but even
Steve, you haven't asked many questions about Justin Ross. What are you talking about?
Especially Kelsey, man. He's getting up there in age. So I don't think you'd expect to see a noticeable decline or anything in training camp, but just got to keep tabs on the Chiefs' most important players. But if you're listening to us on the Arrowhead Pride podcast page, I encourage you to stick around after the break. We will have all of the press conferences from Wednesday's media availability. We heard from offensive coordinator Matt Nagy, as well as wide receiver Richie James, center Creed Humphrey, and defensive end George Karlaftis. As Pete mentioned earlier, Arrowhead Pride Editor Show is coming your way this afternoon with a deeper dive on everything that he's seen so far at training camp. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. And as always, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review everything that we are doing here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. You can follow everything that we do at arrowheadpride.com as well. And you can follow Pete on Twitter at PG Sween. But with all of that, there is no practice tomorrow, and the pads come on Friday. We will talk to you then.